Hey everybody, and welcome back to Trying to with Leah. If you're new here, thank you for joining me. My channel is all about sharing my personal stories and my journey of transformation because I definitely don't have it figured out. I am learning as I go, and I know what it's like to feel stuck. So I like to share my stories in the hopes that you guys will be inspired to make changes in your own life too. I have spent the past few years losing nearly 100 pounds, and I would already be over 100 pounds, but your girl likes to eat. So we're almost there, but we're still working on it. I also left my corporate career and all the stress that came with it and started my own eBay business. And I have transformed my mental and physical health by making small, everyday, consistent choices. So if that's something that you're interested in doing for yourself, then please follow along, and hopefully this will help you do that in your own life. So with Independence Day just having passed, I've been thinking about personal independence. Not the kind where you do everything on your own, but the kind where you know who you are and you stay who you are while you handle whatever life throws at you. And I know that that personal independence can slip away from you without you even realizing it. If you would have asked me 5 years ago if I was independent, I would have said absolutely. I had a career, I paid my own bills, people depend on me, and I showed up and I got it done and I handled problems. And from the outside, I looked like someone who had it all together. But looking back now, I feel like I was not independent at all. I was capable and responsible and reliable, but I had become completely disconnected from who I actually was as a person, because my identity had become wrapped up in taking care of everybody else. And I had just completely neglected asking myself anything like what I wanted or needed. I was too focused on what everybody else needed. And that left me completely neglecting myself. And I talk about this a lot, but the crazy thing is it doesn't happen overnight. It really does happen one choice at a time. One choice of this person's needs are more important than my own needs, instead of this person's needs are just as important as my own needs. When my son was born, I kind of made this unspoken promise to myself. I promised that I was going to do literally anything for him and be there for him in every which way. And when he was diagnosed with autism, that promise became even stronger and even deeper. And I threw myself into all of the therapies and the research and the, how do we learn how he learns? How do we help him grow and help him thrive? And I would not take back a single second of that, because I've gotten to watch him grow into this wonderful, amazing, smart, funny kid who just loves his life. And that's perfect for me. That was the goal. But I realized that while I was helping him build up his world, I didn't even really notice what was happening to my own world. Every decision suddenly became about putting somebody else's needs before mine. And it wasn't just my son, it was my family, everybody, it was friends, everything. But it happened bit by bit. And at first that felt like love, and it felt responsible, and it felt like this is just what being a good person means. But unfortunately I had let it become to the point of self-abandonment. And it's not like anybody forced me to do that. Nobody expected that from me, and nobody asked me, can you put my needs above yours? But I expected it for myself. I expected myself to just keep pushing through, even though I was running on completely empty. And when you do that for long enough, you completely forget who you are outside of that role of the caretaker. But as my son has gotten much more independent over the past few years, I've actually finally had the space to ask myself some questions that I haven't asked in a long time. Like, what do I need? And who am I now outside of this role? And what kind of life do I want to build for myself? And asking those questions can be surprisingly difficult to answer. Because when you spend years living for everybody else, you forget how to live for yourself. You forget that you even deserve to live a life for yourself. And I think that that's a really hard thing to even become aware of, because when you spend your life caring for other people, you are the last person that you think about. You're the last person on the list. But I realized that I could actually care for myself the way that I care for other people, and it didn't have to mean that somebody else went without. But then came the question, what do I even need to feel cared for? How do I even refresh myself? How do I even, recharge the way that I actually need to recharge? So at that point, I kind of started having to play detective and pay attention to myself again and investigate my own needs and wants in small ways. I would ask myself, does this food make me feel energized or exhausted? Are the thoughts that I'm thinking, are they helping me or are they hurting me? When something upsets me, am I just reacting or am I stopping? And am I asking myself, why am I feeling this way? And those seem like simple, easy questions, easy choices. But when you've spent years ignoring yourself, it's not simple. It's revolutionary. It's huge. Little by little, you start noticing patterns. Grease and sugar makes me crash, and healthy foods make me have energy. Negative self-talk makes me feel heavier, and positive self-talk gives me confidence and empowers me. And going for walks made me feel stronger, not just physically, but mentally too. And I pretty much became obsessed with bringing peace and joy and calm back into my life because I had been depriving myself of it for years. And none of those choices actually seem life-changing at first, but together they did change my life. Weight loss may have been a goal at first, and it's still kind of a goal every once in a while now, but it's become more of like a byproduct of me just taking care of myself. When you take care of yourself, your energy skyrockets and your confidence skyrockets. And in my opinion, your capability skyrockets. One of the biggest fears that I had in the beginning of all of this was that if I started taking care of myself, then I would somehow be taking away from my family, or especially my son. But when it came down to it, I feel like the exact opposite happened. The healthier that I became, the better version of me that everybody else received. I was able to show up better for others, and I had more patience and more energy, and I was actually present. I wasn't just surviving the day anymore. I was actually living in the day and actively participating in it. And it finally sunk in that taking care of myself isn't selfish. It's actually necessary and responsible. And it's actually one of the most kind and helpful things that you can do for somebody else, is to provide them with a version of you that's recharged and intentional and ready to help you. For a really long time, and up until just a few years ago, my mind really never stopped. From the moment I woke up until the moment I fell asleep, it was constant planning and worrying and replaying conversations and thinking about everything that I still needed to do. And honestly, I thought that was just part of adulthood. And then one day I actually found a moment of peace. One single moment of peace. And I tried to figure out how to hold on to that peace and make it my baseline. And that's when I started working on quieting my mind and living with intention instead of just being flooded with all of these worries, And for the first few weeks, it was really hard and it felt like an uphill battle, but eventually it got easier and easier and I got better and better at it. And I realized that I do have control over what goes on up there, and I can make it into whatever I need it to be. So I started practicing spending more time in that peace and just kind of being present and taking walks without being constantly connected to my phone, or just sitting in nature for a few minutes and actually paying attention to things that I was doing instead of just kind of rushing throughout my day. Even something as simple as standing in the shower and focusing on the water and just kind of washing away the previous day instead of living 5 hours in the future, it really did start changing how I looked at my future. Because instead of asking, how do I survive today? I started asking, how do I build a life that I actually enjoy living? And that's what eventually led me to leave my corporate career and start that eBay business. Yes, I made a plan for that transition, but believe me, most of the time I was figuring it out as I went. The only thing I really knew was that after spending so many years of pouring myself into work for these different companies, it was time that I poured back into me and invested in myself. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just dreaming about change, I was actually changing. I was participating in that change. And that was really freeing. And I kind of think that that's what reclaiming your independence is all about. Not doing everything alone or never needing help, but actually trusting yourself enough just to build a life that's true to who you are, One decision at a time, and one boundary, and one healthy choice at a time. And I still care deeply about the people in my life, and I still go out of my way to help them whenever they need it. But I've learned that I don't have to stop loving myself in order to love other people well. And in fact, loving myself has made me better at loving everybody else. Okay, so if there is one thing that you take away from today's video, I hope that it's this. You do not have to wait for January 1st or, New Year's or whatever to make any kind of resolution. You don't have to wait for your life to calm down, and you don't have to wait for everything to be perfect. You don't have to wait at all, because that's probably never going to happen anyway. But you can actually start reclaiming your own independence today. And maybe that just starts with a walk or just saying no for the first time ever, Maybe it starts with finally asking yourself, what do I need? Because one small choice can really truly be the catalyst that changes everything for you. It was for me. So thank you guys for spending part of your day with me. And if this resonated with you, I would love to hear your perspective in the comments. Let's help each other. And for this week's challenge, make that choice. Take the risk. Choose what works for you, but build that momentum. And I'll see you guys on the next one.